Love this podcast? Support this show through the Acast supporter feature. It's up to you how much you give, and there's no regular commitment. Just hit the link in the show description to support now.
Explaining football to the friend who's just there for the nachos? Hard. Tailgating from home like a pro with snacks and drinks everyone will love? An easy win. And with Instacart helping deliver the snack time MVPs to your door, you're ready for the game in as fast as 30 minutes. So you never miss a play or lose your seat on the couch or have to go head-to-head for the last chicken wing. Shop Game Day Faves on Instacart and enjoy $0 delivery fees on your first 3 grocery orders. Offer valid for a limited time. Other fees and terms apply. This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. You chose to hit play on this podcast today. Smart choice. Make another smart choice with Auto Quote Explorer to compare rates from multiple car insurance companies all at once. Try it at progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema. Hello and welcome to Writers on Film. My name is John Bleasdale, and today I am going to be talking to Tony Bill. Tony is one of those guests who has to come under the legendary subcategory, I think. He is an actor who has starred alongside Frank Sinatra, Steve McQueen and Pee Wee Herman, amongst many, many others. He's a producer who broke into the big time with his Paul Newman, Robert Redford conman drama The Sting, and he's directed a bunch of films himself, including most recently Flyboys. And he's just had a career that's just gone on and absolutely amazing. You will hear many things in this podcast which will make you make you happy, because this guy's a real insider. He's worked at every level of the business, and this has qualified him to write a book called Movie Speak: How to Talk Like You Belong on a Film Set. It's a lexicon of all the phrases you might hear on a film set, with loads of surprises as well as some you might know, but it's a real education. It's a brilliant book to sort of dip into and impress your friends and colleagues, and especially if you go on the film set, obviously. If you enjoyed the episode, please remember to like, subscribe, and do all those things that you have to do. Then, if you wish to follow me on Twitter, I'm around at Dr. Jonty, DRJONTY. But before you do any of that, just enjoy this conversation, which, again, this is a legendary man, and I'm so proud to be able to offer this conversation for you guys.
My wife, Helen Bartlett, who's a producer, and we were on the set of one of the movies that we did together a long time ago, actually. I think it was on the set of Five Corners. And right. We were talking, she was asking me what a certain term meant. And I told her, and I started thinking about it. And I thought, I wonder where you can find this information. And I discovered that no one had ever written it down, that it was an oral tradition, really. And then I thought, well, I'll start making a list of terms and see how many I know or I can find, and maybe I'll write an article. Maybe I'll just make a list of these words. Anyway, and then I decided, well, maybe it'd be a book. And then I sent the proposal to a publisher, and they instantly said, we love it and let's do it. And then, but they said, but we don't want just to have a lexicon. We want you to write about yourself and personal experiences and things like that. And I said, oh no, I don't want to do that. That's like, I'm not interested in talking about me. I'm interested in doing this research and finding out what these words come from. They said, no, really, we want you to kind of at least do a few chapters. So anyway, that's how the form of it came up. And as I say, I realized that no one had ever written down this language that we use on the movie set. And so there was nowhere to research it. I had no written record of most of these terms. So it took me years, because what I did was when I would direct or produce a movie, or even if I was around somebody who was in the film business, I would use that experience to quiz the crew. And if I heard them say something, or if I wondered what something meant or where it came from, then I would talk to people about it. And that's kind of in keeping with what it is, which is an oral history.
And you've had so much experience as well. You're sort of quite uniquely positioned in that you've started off very early on as an actor, right?
Yes, and as a matter of fact, now that you mention it, and I never thought about this, I don't think I wrote about this, but when I got into the movie business out of college, I was suddenly transported to another planet, another country, where people spoke a language I had never heard before. So on that very first movie, Come Blow Your Horn, I started being fascinated with this language and these habits. There are certain things, and because I was a newcomer, because I was the totally inexperienced kid on the movie set, the crew kind of took me under their wing, and they would say, now don't do this and do that, and here's how we do. So even then I was taught a little bit more than I might have if I hadn't been so fresh.
How old were you when you first started?
I turned 21 or 22. I turned 22 during pre-production. Yeah,
just out of college, and you're in this major sort of Hollywood situation, and they're a major film, and you're surrounded by all these sort of protocols and etiquette and this language that you don't understand.
Exactly right. And of course, everybody was much older and more experienced than I too. So I was in a group of what would normally be old timers, although they were probably all in their 30s or 40s.
They seem old to a 22-year-old.
Yeah, exactly.
And so they take you under their wing, and you have. Did you find that like other actors also had this code, had these words down, or were some of them just sort of drifting through without necessarily being interested in that side of it?
No, most actors have a limited kind of lexicon. They have a kind of a limited vocabulary, because you don't need to know a lot of the lingo that the crew uses, when, so to speak, behind your back. They talk to themselves with this language. They don't really need to talk to the actors about it. So the actors tend not to hear a lot of it. But on the other hand, the actors do hear, some phrases constantly, cheat, or, whatever it is. And some directors and some sets have their own little versions of language, but basically these are the words that are kind of universal. They're so universal that they translate into other languages, exactly. People use them in other languages.
I think you mentioned some of the phrases that actors have to be aware of, like cheat is sort of the most I imagine one of the most commonly used. Banana was a good one. That was one I didn't know.
Good one. Yeah, you said banana left or banana right. Now, some of these terms are rare. They're not everybody uses them all the time. So that's why it was so hard to compile them, because it took me 10 or 12 years of being on sets and paying attention to realize that, I haven't heard that one before, or I know that one, but I haven't written it down, or where do you think it comes from, or where might it come from? So it's very complex, just for a simple word.
Some of them are very, very sort of, so the banana is the sort of curved, slightly unnatural curved movement you walk in order to cover something or to approach the camera more closely, right?
Exactly. Yeah, actors, the people in the audience don't realize that that film acting, it entails quite a few artificial moves or artificial situations that only make it more real when it's on film. So cheating your look, or bananaing, or whatever it is that the actor has to do to be seen doing what they're doing.
Yeah, and even I love because within the language you have these cheats as well, don't you? What was the one? I forget the name now, but it was French something, and it was about how you set up a lighting. You set up the shoot with
a French reverse.
That's right, French reverse. Yeah, could you explain that one for our listeners?
Well, let's see. I got to make sure I'm looking at it here correctly. Yeah. Well, a French reverse is when, instead of turning the camera around and shooting the other side of a scene, or basically usually of a person, you just put rearrange the furniture in the background, or the background itself. You can't rearrange the view of the ocean. But if you have a wall behind you with a painting on it, or even a person, you can just, instead of turning the whole camera around and relighting the scene from that point of view, you can just change the background.
Yes, and you save a lot of time and money by doing that.
Yes, you save a huge amount of time and money.
I was reading about Terrence Malick filming Days of Heaven, and he would use a cheat of basically filming dialogue facing one way, and then just swap the actor and film in exactly the same direction without moving the camera. So in the finished film, it looked like they were talking to each other, standing opposite each other, but he was just using the light as best as he could because he knew he didn't have that much light.
That's right. They did that movie with a lot of natural lighting, so you can't stop the sun. So when you have the sun shining where you want it, it's easier to put people in the same position rather than change the sun.
I love those stories. I love that idea of just those improvised cheats, as you say. One of the other sort of types of phrase that runs all the way through the book is when a particular rule is named after a particular actor or director. So some of these, like the Clint Eastwood rule, is very specific to a problem or an idea, but then there's others like the Doris Day parking space, I think.
I forgot about that. Now in these days, that's kind of an obscure term, but I heard the other day a saying, rock star parking. A parking place, you park wherever you want. Others are named, not named, but others are hard to replicate today.
The Gary Coleman was one that I found funny as well. The Gary Coleman's like a stand, a short stand, and so it's. That's kind of the crew tends to invent rude slang. It usually has to do with the times and places that they're in. So I try to avoid that in the book because those are transitory. Those come in and out of fashion. People don't know what they're talking about usually. There's just a few of them that refer to people of note, but not much. Tell us a little bit more about your career then, because you moved from acting and you went into you sort of went behind the camera and went into production, right? Yeah,
right out of school, out of college, I got this job, as we were saying, basically starring in a movie.
Mm.
So I was thrust into the center of the culture as well as the work itself, and it was a very interesting experience. It was not exactly the fulfillment of a life's dream for me, because I hadn't always dreamed of being in the movies. I actually wasn't even a movie fan particularly. So um, it was a new experience for me, not as much a fulfillment of a dream. And so it turned out that being a movie star was not my idea of a great way to live your life. And so I I I started on that set with Bud Yorkin and Norman Lear, who were the producer and director. I started talking about things that interested me, not the movies as much as other things that were about the movies. And they encouraged me. They said, you should look, if you want to make movies, or you think this would be a good movie, come to us and talk to us about it. So I started. I was encouraged to talk about what I thought might be an interesting subject, or an interesting book, or an interesting play for a movie, because in those days, this is in the early 60s, movies were made from books or plays. They weren't generally made from original screenplays. There were some original screenplays, but nothing like what we see now. So I, on the other hand, not knowing any better, wondered why hasn't anybody made a movie about this subject or that subject? Why hasn't anybody made a movie from this obscure book, not a bestseller, so on and so forth. And as I mentioned this to my friends, or my contemporaries, who at the time were the Steven Spielbergs and Francis Coppola's and Terry Malick's, my friends, people my age who were not established in the movie business at all, I saw them agree with me. Yeah, that would make a good movie, or yeah, that's a great subject, right? And so they started enthusing about them. And so I thought, well, maybe I know more than I think I do, or maybe I'm, not know more, maybe I'm more attuned to this strange business than I thought I was. And maybe my ideas aren't so dumb as they might be, or not so outside the norm. And so I thought, I'm gonna try to make a movie. I'm gonna try to indulge my tastes. So the first one I think that I undertook was, I wanted to make a film about the world of big rig truck driving, the guys who drive their trucks across the country. And there's a whole subculture of language. Again, when we're talking about words, there's a whole subculture of language and habits and rules and regulations, and especially music. There's a whole world of country and Western music about truck driving. And I had met a young man who's my age, we were both in our 20s, who I liked a lot, and we shared our tastes, we shared common interests. And so I thought he'd be a great guy to write this. And his name was Terry Malick. Right. And so I went to another friend of mine who knew me and my tastes, who was a sailing friend of mine, and he had become head of the Brothers. And so I said, I'd like to hire this unknown writer to write a script about a subject that nobody's ever tackled before, which is big rig truck driving. What do you think? And here's what I want to do, and so on. And so he agreed with me. His name was John Calley, and he thought it was a good idea. And that's how my first movie got made as a producer. It was a disaster. I made the two biggest mistakes a producer can make, which is I hired the wrong director and I didn't fire him. I stuck by him. I stuck to the code of the movie business at the time, which is, a producer supports his director through thick and thin. At any rate, that was how I got my first movie made. And then that led to other equally kind of original screenplays. I haven't made movies out of books or plays, only out of original, and actually usually first-time writers.
And so with that, did you regret not directing that film yourself?
No, I regret not getting Terry to direct it, but he was a first-timer too. So I hired a first-time director, and I couldn't figure out how to replace him with another first-time director.
So you started with Deadhead Miles, which, as you say, was a success. It didn't even get a release, right? As Paramount just sort of buried it.
Not much of one. Yeah.
Right.
It was an offbeat movie. It was a very offbeat movie. First of all, Terry's a very offbeat writer, so that it needs special care. And secondly, the director did a terrible job, and so it didn't live up to its potential as a script. But it was the first, and I managed to survive it.
Right. And so that was a stepping stone to your next. I mean, that was you sort of could continue in the business.
Yeah, and it took me a long time to want to really feel like I was qualified to direct a movie too. I wasn't instantly, like many people of my generation were. I didn't feel confident enough. I didn't feel privileged enough. I didn't feel responsible enough, I guess, to say, give me millions of dollars to spend as I see fit, which is really what you're asking. When you ask to direct a movie, that's what you're asking. I mean, that's my attitude. Now, another person's attitude is, I wrote this script, I'd be the best director for it. Or, I love this subject, I'm the best director. Or, this is the story of my life, I should be directing it. I don't feel that way. I feel like you're asking somebody to give you millions of dollars, and you're the one responsible for how you spend it, no matter what kind of controls they may have. You're the one that says, one more take, or that's good enough, or like, let's shoot this in the dark. Whatever it is, all these decisions are spending other people's money the way you feel like spending it.
There's a lot of responsibility, but at the same time, you've sort of you were acting in films for a good period of time, so you must have had experience as well observing directors and seeing what they did.
I asked myself if I learned anything. That's why it took me so long to direct a movie. I did. I worked with some great directors. I went with some famous directors and some big movie stars, and I worked with these people, and I like to think that I learned something. I like to think that I paid attention on the set, that I got to know them, but when it comes down to it, after several years, after I think maybe 6 or 7 years of acting and of producing a bunch of movies, I said to myself, I don't think I know anything. I just, I don't feel like I know anything. And coming from a largely intense academic background, I said to myself, there's only one way to know if you've learned anything, and that's to take a test, right? That's what you do when you're in school. To find out if you've learned the curriculum, you take a test. So the test is directing a movie. So I thought, I'm gonna give myself the ultimate test if I should stay in the movie business, because I really don't feel like I belong here. I'm really not cut out to be famous. I'm not cut out to be, an actor. Being a producer is kind of waiting for somebody else to tell you they're going to make your movie. It's having the responsibility without the pleasure. I don't know. So I thought, I'm going to give myself the test and direct a movie. And if I do a good job, I'm going to stay in the movie business. If I can't do a good job, then that's a sign that I haven't learned anything. And I'm not so sure I shouldn't change businesses while I can and become an architect, for example, with something which interested me, or become something that I feel passionate about, because I just don't think I know anything. And that's how I directed my first movie. Was actually a short film, and it turned out quite well. And that was my main encouragement. And then My Bodyguard turned out very well too. So I thought, well, I guess I found something that I can do, and I can claim to know what I'm doing, even though even there you don't feel like you know what you're doing.
It sounds like you're suffering from the Dunning-Kruger effect, but the opposite way around, where coming from an academic background as well, you have more awareness of what you don't know than the average person.
Exactly. And so I to answer your question in a short way, I don't know what I learned from working with Francis Coppola or Sidney Pollack or Sir Carol Reed or all these people that I should have learned something from. I don't know what I learned.
What about fellow actors in that environment? Did you, because you said earlier you sort of didn't feel, in that environment you didn't feel necessarily this was where you wanted to be. Did you get on with them, or because you were acting with like Rock Hudson, Frank Sinatra, Steve McQueen, a whole bunch of the top stars of the time.
Yeah, I got along with them very well. They were all very nice to me, very kind and very generous, and I think patient with me, because I don't think I'm a very good actor. I wouldn't ever cast myself in something. So here these people had to put up with this young guy who's like minimally talented at best. So yes, they were all lovely to me. I don't think I ever had a confrontation or a argument or a put down from any of these people, and in fact I did get along with them very well. McQueen and I became really good friends. We shared passions for cars and airplanes,
right?
And so we had a real bond there, even though we were from such different worlds and living in different orbits. But McQueen, when I directed that first little short film called The Ransom of Red Chief, I thought it turned out pretty well. And so I optioned a script, a first-time writer, to see if that might be my first film. And I sent the script to Steve McQueen because it was very good casting for him. It was a construction worker. And so I sent him the script. He said, I really like this script. And I said, well, and here's this little short film I directed. And he calls me back and he says, that movie's really good. You're really a good director. Let's do it. So I thought, oh my God, my first directing job, I'm going to have Steve McQueen, the biggest star in the world. He wants to do it. And he was part of a company at the time, and the head of his company wouldn't let him do it.
Oh, man.
So much for my...
So close, but so far.
Yeah. That happens in my business. If I were ever to research and write another book, one of the things I would like to do is a book about original casting. Who originally wanted to do this movie but couldn't do it? Who did they want but wasn't available? Who did they want who turned them down? And how did it come to be that, you name it, Robert Redford, Paul Newman, Steve McQueen wasn't in their movie, but instead they got somebody who was even better, that you can't even imagine that movie could have been made with the person they really wanted at first. And almost every movie, I dare say, has gone through an actor or two or three that they couldn't get. Their first choice didn't work out, and they're so lucky they didn't get their first choice.
Yeah, they're just sort of the Ronald Reagan in Casablanca or Frank Sinatra in Dirty Harry.
Yeah, there's a long list of almost casts, and it's interesting how I tell my students often when they're talking about casting, one of the movies of my youth that as an actor that I was up for and I was aware of was Midnight Cowboy.
Oh, right.
So Midnight Cowboy, John Schlesinger, I met him for that movie. And every young actor in town met John Schlesinger to be in that movie. So John Schlesinger ended up wanting an actor named Michael Sarrazin, who was a contemporary of mine and a very good actor. And Michael Sarrazin was under contract to Universal. And so in those days, actors were sometimes under contract to a studio. And if you wanted an actor who was under contract to that studio, you had to make a deal with the studio to get the actor and pay the actor. And, they negotiated the deal, and you paid the studio because they were already paying the actor on a weekly or monthly basis. So Universal wouldn't let Michael Sarrazin, or ask too much money for Michael Sarrazin. And so John Schlesinger said, okay, well, the hell with it. I'm gonna go with an unknown. I'm gonna go with this kid, John Voight. That's how kind of nebulous and how kind of fragile casting is. If they had gotten their first choice, if they had gotten Michael Sarrazin, we wouldn't be talking about that movie. Not that Michael Sarrazin wasn't a good actor, but he was nothing like John Voight was. And conversely, who knows what his career would have been like if he hadn't gotten the role in Midnight Cowboy. So it's a very fragile world we live in and deal in especially in casting. And there, some people get lucky, like I did, and get cast instantly. Some people spend in effect, a lifetime waiting for that role. Like another example is Harry Dean Stanton. I don't know if you know who he was.
Yeah,
Harry Dean Stanton, right? I mean, one of our great movie actors.
Absolutely.
Not a leading man, a quirky guy. Every actor in Los Angeles knew who Harry Dean was before the world knew. He was everybody's like, oh man, he's such a good actor. I hope he gets it. And he finally starred in a movie a couple of months before his death. His last movie, I think it was called Lucky.
It was, yeah.
Right? It's a wonderful movie. He's great in it, of course. But that's how long Harry Dean waited to get that role.
To have a proper lead role in a film.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's amazing. He's such a... There's a new documentary I just watched with him in it, and it's just about his life. And to hear him singing as well, he's got a beautiful voice, and he sings these Spanish language, sort of Mexican songs that are,
Yeah.
He's got a real passion for.
You know more about movies than any 10 people I know.
Well, I interviewed the director of that film. I'm trying to remember what his name is. He was in Zodiac. He played one of the suspects in Zodiac. I'm just going to Google it. John Carroll Lynch. I hadn't even Googled it. It just came back. Just typing made it. He's called John Carroll Lynch.
Did a great job.
And I've got a feeling it might have even been his first film as a director, because he's, as I say, he's principally an actor. That reminds me a little bit as well of watching Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and the fact that it's set in that era, but you've got that DiCaprio character basically one or two steps down from Steve McQueen, and he could have got the great escape.
Yeah. That movie, I have the big tip of my hat to that movie that I guess few people who are not my age and my geography of being here and living in Hollywood. That movie so captured and so accurately captured the time and place of Hollywood in the early 60s. Most people won't realize it because they weren't around and living in Hollywood at the time. I mean, you can admire it for feeling like it captures the time, but I'm here to tell you it extraordinarily accomplished a replication of that time. Well, they spent a lot of time and money and trouble on that movie, doing something that only like three of us will appreciate.
Did you find the behind the scenes stuff accurate as well?
Yeah, I did. If I remember correctly. I saw that movie in two parts because my daughter was in the hospital that night, and I was waiting to find out if an operation worked, and I couldn't do anything. I was stuck, so I went to the movie.
It took a lifetime to find the person you want to marry. Finding the perfect engagement ring is a lot easier. At BlueNile.com, you can find or design the ring you've always dreamed of, with help from Blue Nile's jewelry experts, who are on hand 24/7 to answer questions, and the ease and convenience of shopping online. For a limited time, get $50 off your purchase of $500 or more with code LISTEN at BlueNile.com. That's $50 off with code LISTEN at BlueNile.com.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
And I waited for the phone call, and the phone call came halfway through the movie. So I only watched the movie halfway through, and then I left, and then I came back and watched the other half.
You had your big break as a producer with The Sting, is that right?
Well, that was the big success. After the failure of Dead End Miles, I met a writer who had written a script called Steelyard Blues. I thought it was really talented, but really difficult to get made, and really not an obvious commercial subject. And so I set about to option Steelyard Blues and commission a movie called, which would end up being called The Sting. It didn't have a title, because I met with him. His name is David Ward. I said, David, I love this script, Steelyard Blues, but I don't know if I can possibly tackle it. But what do you want to do next? And he gave me like a 2-minute little pitch about, I want to do this movie about con men in the 20s or 30s, and it's about a young guy who gets whose best friend gets killed by a con man, and he decides to con the guy out of every dollar he's got. That was it. So that's how The Sting was born, and the script is a really good script, and so the script of Steelyard Blues is, we got it made. Actually, I didn't think we would, but we got it made. So
it's Donald Sutherland, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that film. I saw it a few years ago, but it's quite. I mean, again, a little bit like Deadhead Miles. It's got a sort of quirky
kind of anti-establishment. Jane Fonda and Donald Sutherland and Peter Boyle. It's a little bit goofy, right? And so very delicate subject matter.
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of it's funny watching that those sort of late 60s, early 70s films now, because they're so sort of plugged into their time.
Yeah.
Something.
Anyway, those are my first producing efforts.
And when you as a producer, and in terms of to bring it back a little bit to the book as well, did you find yourself in another kind of language? Was that a totally different sort of world, or did you find yourself on set quite a lot? How were you in terms of your involvement with the films?
Every film was different. In terms of one's image of producing, on many of them, I was kind of what's it called, a first mover or something like that. I got this. My biggest accomplishment, so to speak, is finding material that's original, fresh, and in my case, almost always the first script ever written or the first script produced by its author. I'm very attracted to first timers. During the actual making of the movie, every movie was different. On Taxi Driver, which is a film that my partners and I optioned, my partner Michael Phillips was there all the time, and I wasn't. I didn't even take a producing credit on that movie. I said, I'm not comfortable with being a producer, so it's just a Bill Phillips, my last name production.
Right.
Their last name on each movie. I think the movie that I had the most hands-on daily, be there, argue with the director, be a real presence, was Hearts of the West, which was first time script, second time director, and as it turns out, without realizing it, kind of an autobiographical movie for me to do, because it's about a kid from the Midwest who's like totally naive, comes to Hollywood to be a writer, and stumbles upon a Western movie set, which ends up making him into a movie star. So
right.
And falls under the tutelage of an old timer. So it has a kind of a resonance as a tale that I relate to. But in fact, it was somebody else's script that, a young writer who'd never written a script before. And second-time director Howard Zeef, who was a really interesting, funny. Howard came from the world of commercials, where he was the king of commercials. He was a hugely successful commercial director. But I found we had conflicting styles, if nothing else. Whereas, Howard, we got to get the way day's work done. You can't spend all day looking, casting extras, or you got to go look at locations. We got to pick the location for tomorrow or next week. So I was like the director of the director, in a sense, as a producer. So my responsibility, I felt my responsibilities, and I didn't enjoy, and I don't enjoy kind of being the boss, so to speak. But on that movie, I was the kind of the image of a producer, which is like we got to get this done. We don't have enough money for that. We don't have this. You got to go do this. We have to do this. So that's a movie that I really used my production experience on more than I needed to.
And that's starring a young Jeff Bridges as well.
Yeah, Jeff was great in it. Great in it. Jeff Bridges, by the way, speaking of casting, if we had cast The Sting the way it was written, and if I could imagine right now who we would have cast, we would have cast Jeff Bridges and Lee Marvin as those two guys. That's the way the script was written. The script was written about a young, almost innocent, naive kid whose friend is killed and decides to go after the guy who killed him by conning him. And he goes to this retired geezer, doesn't even want to do it anymore, and talks him into helping him do it. Now, the movie casts Redford as the kid and Newman as the geezer. Well, you won't remember, but there are several points in the movie, in the Sting, where Newman refers to Redford as kid. He says, "We're not as smart." Redford says, "We're not as smart as we think we are," and Newman says, "You never are, kid." Well, that's just a vestige of the language of the script that he calls him kid, because they're almost the same age. So ideally in casting, it would have been Jeff Bridges and Lee Marvin. And I often kind of regret that it's not.
Yeah, I could definitely see it. Yeah, I could definitely see a great version of The Sting with those two in the main roles.
Yeah. So you never know. You never know. When you start to make a movie, you just never know how it's going to turn out. You never know who's going to be in it. You never know if you made the right choices on a daily, hourly basis, but sometimes you do.
William Goldman's maxim, nobody knows anything.
Yeah.
Relating to that, have there been times in your career where you've been really surprised at sort of the reception of a film?
100%. I think to continue the Sting analogy, one of my best friends was a really smart producer, not a successful one, but a really smart one. And so when we screened The Sting for the first and only time for the public, I invited him to come to the screening with me, and I'll never forget. We walked out of the screening, and it was like, "Well, how'd you like it?" "I don't know. What do you think?" "What do you think? And I said, "I think it'll do well. I think if we're lucky, it'll do kind of almost Butch Cassidy business." And Butch Cassidy was pretty successful, but Sting was much more successful. So even after you see it, you don't know, much less all the way along the way. And then there's the movies, that you think are going to be successful and they bomb. And it's just, I don't know. I think there are people, who they have enthusiasm more than instincts, but there are people that kind of think the movie's going to do as well as it does. The story that I think illustrates that was David, what was his name? I'm trying to remember the guy's name who was head of Paramount for a while. It doesn't matter. Somebody asked him, somebody asked him as he was retiring from being head of Paramount, how do you think, you did? What do you think of your legacy? He says, "I'll tell you what, if I had made all the movies I down and turned down all the movies I made, it would be the same. It would be wow." So that's where he came down on being able to call your successes. And I get it. Yeah. Looking back on it, I might say the same thing. If I made some of the movies that I read and passed on, or if I had passed on some of the ones that I made, I think I'd be about the same.
It gets to that point where, there are those books by, Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow, that idea of lots of experts basically don't do as well as a 50-50, just random choice. They don't perform as well as that, even to the point of things like, heart surgeons and, should we operate, shouldn't we? And the expert consultants don't their results are exactly the same as random.
That's right. And by the way, I haven't made that many movies that I can claim to even be part of that club. David Picker is the guy I'm thinking about. He's a wonderful producer. I had lunch the other day with my old friend Mike Medavoy, and we were talking about movies that he's had a hand in, and his list of movies is like endless. That as a producer or as a studio head or as a, people that he claims responsibility for. I mean, that's a record you can kind of decide whether you should have made this one or shouldn't have made that one.
And he's sort of his idea is that a third of them are great, a third of them are okay, and a third of them are terrible. It's just like, that's the division.
That's about. I think that's probably pretty accurate. One thing is sure: no one bats 1,000, as they say in baseball. No one makes hit after hit, and no one makes even success after success, or even really a really good movie all the time. Spielberg's got some movies that barely saw the light of day.
Yeah, I mean, Spielberg definitely sort of has a great batting average, to continue the metaphor, but at the same time, you do think, well, after a certain point, you've got all the advantages as well, so you should have made a better movie than the BFG or But you had everything available to you. Come on, man, do better. Sorry,
but
Stephen.
That answers your question though about do you know it's going to be do you know it's going to be a success? I don't. I think everybody, there's an old saying in the movie business that it's not appropriate, but people say it. They say nobody sets out to make a bad movie, and that's kind of a lame excuse for making a bad movie, but it's true. You don't set out to make a movie saying, "Oh, I'm going to make this. It's going to be crappy." You do set out often to say, "This is never going to succeed. We're going to do it anyway." Steve, the guy I knew that was the embodiment of that attitude, apart from me, is Sidney Pollack. Sidney thought, I didn't talk to him about every movie, but I was good friends with him. We talked his movies a lot, and Sidney was just sure that something was never going to work. I mean, the perfect example was he was so miserable. I remember making Tootsie. He thought that he was suicidal over Tootsie. He thought it was never, ever, ever going to work. It was a disaster. Didn't get along with Dustin Hoffman. Didn't think it was going to be funny. It was a kind of absurd premise, and of course, it's one of the great movies. And he also felt the same about The Way We Were.
Yeah.
He didn't have an ending for The Way We Were. He didn't know how to make the movie. He didn't think it was going to work. So, well, you just kind of the train is on. You're on the train. You just can't get off once you start making the movie, and it becomes obvious to you and horribly apparent that you never should have started this thing. We never should have started doing this movie. There's no cure for it. It's going to be a disaster. My career is over, yet I have to finish it. And this is a very common feeling, very common. I mean, among all artists too. I mean, you can ask songwriters and poets and painters, but in the movies, it's particularly weighty because you've got hundreds of people working on a movie. You've got millions of dollars at stake. You've got a lifetime of reputation of your own and other people, and you wake up at night and you say, "There's no way anybody's going to go see this movie. It's a disaster." You just have to muscle. You just have to go ahead and finish it. But this is very common. And then there's another school too, which is at least. I have to believe that is the people who think everything's going to be a hit. This is great. This movie is great. We're doing great. My actors are great. The script is working. And there are directors who feel that way, and they're not always right either.
Who?
Yes.
Could you think of an example of one of those?
Mark Rydell, very, very enthusiastic.
Right.
Yes, there's not many though.
Yeah, it's more glass half empty.
Yeah, well, it's a way of looking at life too, as you say, glass half empty. And it's wonderful in a way to be enthusiastic all the time. But I would bet that if you did a poll of directors, you would find that almost all of them just feel like if I can just get through the day, one more day, I just got to get today's work done, and then tomorrow's, and then we'll worry about it and we'll save it in the editing room, which is pretty true, by the way. I mean, that's how movies work. I mean, you spend all these days and nights in misery, just physically miserable, because it's so difficult, getting up and going to work and doing everything and answering all the questions, doing it, and then you need to go back and put it all together in a way that makes it better than it would have been. So I think I mentioned it in the book, my experience with an actress who kept coming to work every day with she knew all her lines, and she knew what she was motivated by, and she knew what she was going to do. And I kept saying, you don't need to do that on a movie. It's not like a play. And we're not making a movie here on the set. We're just shooting a lot of film, just shooting a lot of stuff, good stuff, bad stuff, accidental stuff we never thought we'd do, stuff we rehearsed. And then we're going to go back to LA, and I'm going to make a movie out of all that stuff. And that's how they're made. People don't understand that.
George Lucas said, I shoot things so I have something to edit.
That's good. By the way, I just saw a lovely documentary about the making of American Graffiti. If you haven't seen it, it's out there on YouTube, I think. It's a little like an hour-long doc about the making of that movie, and it's really such a great lesson in how fragile it is to cast and make a movie, especially one that doesn't contain movie stars, commercial elements. It's original, fresh. It's a real and how long it took to get that movie made, how many times it was canned. It's a lovely little documentary. You'll love it. It's great.
And you were producing throughout the 70s and you started directing in the 80s, but you were still appearing in films, still acting in roles all the way through, right? You were in Shampoo with the Hal Ashby film, and
that was a total accident. I have no idea why anybody would cast me in something. It would pop up every few years. Somebody would want me to do something, or I would do something. It was just, I don't know why in the world they ever thought of me for something. In terms of Shampoo, that was less of an accident in a way. They had started shooting, I believe they're ready to shoot or started shooting that movie. They needed to replace the actor that they had originally cast, and I see. Warren Beatty knew me enough to kind of know me, we had met. The role was of a TV producer, and for whatever reason, somebody said, well, how about Tony? Maybe he can act in this thing, and he is a producer, and he kind of looks like the guy should, all of this confluence of accidents happened all at once. And so, and I was available because I had just finished shooting Hearts of the West. And so I got invited to the party, and it was great.
That's such a great film. That's a really, again, a real film of its time, but one that...
I guess it is. I got to look at it again.
It's weird because it's one of those films where you think Warren Beatty is the star. It's Warren Beatty and Judy Christie, but I end up having real sympathy for Judy Christie's husband.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, no, I'm not sure if they're husband or her older establishment sort of guy. Jack Warden.
Jack Warden is the funniest person. When you're making a movie, one of the fun things about acting in a movie is that a lot of the time you're not doing anything. You're sitting around. So sitting around with Jack Warden was the funniest experience I've ever had, being on the set with him. Oh, yeah, exactly. Stories and just a funny guy.
I always think that about some actors. Whenever there's an actor who seems to be getting a lot of work and appears to be in everything, I always think to myself, I bet they give good lunch. Yeah. I bet they're good to be around. So it's like, yeah, let's get him on board again. If we're going to spend 20 weeks in Mexico, we might as well do it with so and so.
You're so right. There's nothing better than to be amused. There's another book, by the way. When you're sitting around on a set, not just with actors, with the grip, with the camera, you hear stories because they've all worked on other movies. They've all worked with other people. They've all had adventures. And a book called something like Tales from the Crew, right? would be so amusing, so much fun, because they're talking about stuff they're privileged to talk about. They're stories that you never hear in public about the actors they've worked with, or the directors, or just the day that they had to get through and do something. They're just the best stories.
That would be amazing. I've got a horrible feeling everybody will be, lawyered up, and NDAs will have to be signed and all the rest of it. So you won't get them like you used to once upon a time. But wow, that would be great. I remember talking to someone and they told me about an actor, and they started telling me nicknames of people that the crew had for certain actors, and I can't repeat any of that because it would definitely be libelous.
I know. I don't think you could do it justice, but it would really be fun to write that book.
And then and another film in your, because it's just like that filmography is so fun. Yeah, I mean, you have Pee-wee's Big Adventure, which I thought, wow, I love that movie.
There's another accident of casting. Why? How did they want me to do that? Well, what happened was my friend Bob Shapiro was producing it. When he first read the script, he sent me the script and asked me what I thought of it and if I would be interested in directing it. And I said, this is not for me. This is a wild script. But when it came back, I ended up getting it made. They did the same thing. Who were going to get to play the head of the studio? Oh, well, Tony can act like a studio head. Let's get him. So that was another completely accidental casting call that just happened. And
it must be great because it gives you the opportunity to work with so many great people as well, and it's like I don't know, it's like an old pro keeping his hand in.
Well, that's kind of true. But I'll tell you something else about it that interested me for another kind of equally quixotic reason. Somebody thought of me for a movie for television, which is a film about a guy, a nice guy who turns out to be a murderer, right? And so that was the role. So that was good casting for me. And they were doing it, and for whatever reason, they thought of me, and I said, great. And so when I went to do it, I thought, I'm always telling young actors, when I work with non-actors or first-time actors, I have a kind of mantra, which is, don't let me catch you acting. So,
right.
And then you can talk to non-actors that way. We can't talk to a real actor that way. So I thought, I'm going to take my own advice on this movie. I'm going to show up, and I am not going to do anything. I am not going to act. I am not going to try to impress the director. I'm not going to try to give a good performance. I'm just going to show up and say the lines, and if the director says, well, do more or do less or do something different, then I'll do it. But I'm going to free myself of any thought of ever working again, because every actor has a little devil on their shoulder saying, you better be good, you better give a good performance, you better be great, or you're not going to work again. You're never going to work again. If you're bad, you've had it. So I was free of that pressure. I didn't care if I ever worked again as an actor. And so I'm just going to show up, say my lines, and go home. And if anything else the director will ask me to do, I'll do it. And that's what I did. And I was really good. I thought to myself, you never like yourself. No actor likes to watch themselves, and you always hate them. And so, but I looked at it and I thought, wow, I took my own advice and I was pretty good. So, but to show up with that attitude, if you are an actor, a professional actor, is very difficult. That's why it's so hard to be a leading person in anything, because you have to really leave your ambition at home. You have to say, I don't care if I ever work again, because either I'm not going to do anything, or I'm going to do something that's so different or so difficult or so kind of gutsy that I'm going to risk being bad.
Some of my favorite actors, I think, have that sort of that easiness that they're always being accused of underplaying stuff. It's like Robert Mitchum, I think, is amazing, and he doesn't seem to ever do anything, and yet. Well,
Harry Dean Stanton is an example. My friend Ulu Grossbart is a great director. Once we were talking about Harry Dean because he was in a movie of Hulu's called what was it called, with Dustin Hoffman, Straight Time. And
that's an amazing movie. That's one of Dustin Hoffman's best films.
Great movie. Well, I'll tell you a second.
Amazing film.
That was an accident in a sense. So, but Ulu said about Harry Dean Stanton, he said, he's incapable of being bad.
Right.
There are people like that. Our friend Sissy Spacek, who we've worked with, she can't be bad. She just, whatever she does is never bad. You can be to this or to that, but you're never bad. But Straight Time, Dustin was supposed to direct. So he kind of foundered. He kind of they started producing and started making the movie, and he just wasn't up for it. And so he called Ulu to take over. And Ulu took that movie over from Dustin because he was like Dustin's best friend.
That's one of my favorite Dustin Hoffman films. I don't think it has the reputation it deserves. It's just utterly brilliant. Harry Dean Stanton's wonderful in it. Gary Busey's in it, I think.
You are a walking, talking encyclopedia. I can't believe it. I think you're right.
Yeah, I think he is. And there's a actress who's in it, which it might be her first. Teresa Russell is in it as well.
So it's a really good movie, but how did it get made, and how did it end up with Ulu direct? I mean, it's a total accident that Ulu Grossbart is directing that movie. And it wouldn't have happened if he hadn't been best friends with Dustin Hoffman, and if Dustin Hoffman hadn't failed's not the right word, but hadn't stopped directing it. It's an accident. It's a total accident when a movie turns out well. Not just one accident, but a whole a repertoire of daily accidents. Something happens and you can't shoot that location, so you shoot in a different one. Something happens and the actor got sick that day, so you had to. It's day in and day out. It's a series of accidents. And matter of fact, my favorite definition of directing was at least attributed to Orson Welles. The director is the person who presides over the accidents. That's the best definition of directing.
That's brilliant. That's in the book. I recognize you quoted that in the book. A title for your next book has got to be A Repertoire of Daily Accidents. Thanks so much for talking to me, Tony. I've got one more last question, and then I'll let you go. Is there a book about movies, a film book, that you would like to recommend to our listeners? You can recommend any, or you can recommend more than one if you prefer. But is there a book that you've read about the film world that you think, this is one of the books that people should read?
It's on my shelf. Can I take a second to go get it? Because I want to quote it accurately.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. This, I think, is one of the best books about the movie business and making movies and so on and so forth. It's called Pictures at a Revolution. Pictures at a Revolution by Mark Harris, who is a great writer. And it is relevant to its period. It's about 5 movies that were made in 1968 and how they got made and so on and so forth. And it just captures the period of time and the kind of zeitgeist of making movies. Now, it's not really about the daily making of movies, but I think it's the most terrific book I've read about the movie biz and movies. The 5 movies that were made, all in 1968, were Bonnie and Clyde, Dr. Dolittle, The Graduate, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, and In the Heat of the Night. And they all represent a different style of movie and a different era of movies. That Mark Harris's claim, his premise here, is that year marked a turning point in the making of movies. The old Hollywood movie represented by Dr. Dolittle or Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, and the new Hollywood being Bonnie and Clyde and The Graduate, and somewhere in between In the Heat of the Night. So I really love this book. So that's my reading recommendation.
Wow, that's great. That's a fantastic book. Thank you so much, Tony. And thanks so much for joining us. I hope you write that next book so we can talk some more.
Well, I'll have to live a whole other lifetime to get the material down. To write a book about Tales from the Crew. I got to start all over again.
So that was me talking to the wonderful Tony Bill. I hope you enjoyed it. I had an amazing time chatting with him, and we really, so many funny things, so many wise observations. I mean, this is a guy who's seen it all. He's the guy who, if he tells you Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is pretty accurate, you can believe it. So all that remains for me to do is thank Ali Howard for the art, Ellie Atkins for the music, wonderful music, I love that music, and thanks to Tony Bill for talking to me. Go out and buy his book, it's amazing, or stay in and buy his book, buy it online if you wish. Great. So thanks for listening, and I'll see you next week, I guess, unless other things happen. But anyway, we'll speak soon.
If there's one thing that my family and friends know me for, it's being an amazing gift giver. I owe it all to Celebrations Passport from 1-800-Flowers.com, my one-stop shopping site that has amazing gifts for every occasion. With Celebrations Passport, I get free shipping on thousands of amazing gifts. And the more gifts I give, the more perks and rewards I earn. To learn more and take your gift giving to the next level, visit 1-800-Flowers.com/ACAST. That's 1-800-Flowers.com/ACAST.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.